So you
Oh,
can start it.
all right.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Donya Dawson, and I am a cancer survivor, and I'm honored to be moderating this session today. Our presenter for this session is Dr. Yeng. Dr. Yeng, an internal medicine and pediatric physician at Health Partners Park Nicollet. She provides a full spectrum of primary care with an emphasis on preventative health for both children and adults, newborn care, and management of chronic conditions such as diabetes, asthma, high blood pressure, and heart disease. She is deeply committed to forming collaborative relationships with her patients, creating shared care plans, and empowering patients and families to achieve their best health. Before I hand things over to Dr. Yeng, just a quick note. Today's session will provide general information about cancer screening guidelines. We welcome your questions and have set aside time at the end of this for questions. However, we will not be able to address individual medical cases or offer personal medical advice. For your personal health concerns, please consult your healthcare provider, or you can consult one of the care providers that are here today. And as a reminder, schedule your one-on-one cancer screenings that are offered for the providers today. It's a great way to get your specific questions answered. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Yang.
Thank you so much. All right, good morning. Well, is it afternoon now? It's afternoon now. I've been up for way too long. But thank you so much to Amna and the university for including me in this conversation, really important conversations about cancer screening. Today, you guys just heard some really fantastic speakers around the research around cancer. Today, I'm just going to mainly focus on the screening aspect of women cancers that affect women. And really from a primary care perspective, because that's what I do predominantly. Before I start on the conversation itself, I just want to say that, I am a clinician who has been deeply involved with health equity my whole career. And so I also lead our health equity work at Health Partners in Park Nicollet. Not only that, but I lead one of the Hmong community organization called the Hmong Healthcare Professionals Coalition, which Amna is a member of. And so, I'm speaking to you mainly from that perspective of, a primary care clinician as well as a clinician who is deeply involved and deeply care about the equity and the disparity that I see in my everyday practice. So with that, we'll get going here. So why do we care about screening? You guys already heard about the research, but why do I care as a clinician? Because as far as I can see in all of the years that I've been in practice, we know that many cancers grow silently with no early symptoms. That's why we call it screening. Because if cancers present with symptoms, we wouldn't need to screen, right? So this is why we screen. Screening saves lives. And even some cancers, when we screen, if we get them early, we can prevent cancer from developing ever. For example, colon cancer, we screened with a colonoscopy, and when we find little polyps or little growths inside the colon, we can remove those. And then those will not grow into cancer or colon cancer. So that is really the reason why we screen, okay? And so the other thing is that if we find it early, it is much easier to treat and the survival rates is much better. For example, breast cancer is 99% survivable if you find it early. But if you don't find it early, the survival rate can be as low as 14%. Now that's a pretty scary drop, right? Same thing for colon cancer. If you screen early, you find it early, the survival rate is 90%. It drops down significantly, down closer to 10% if you find it by the time it has already spread beyond the colon. So this is why cancer screening is important, because it saves lives, okay? The other thing that, as I said, my equity background is that not all cancer affects people the same, right? We know that breast cancer in African American women and in Asian women, we tend to get diagnosed way later than white women do. And African American women tend to get breast cancers that are way more aggressive, and they die from those breast cancers at a much higher rate than white women. So this is why it's so important, if I'm speaking to you and you learn nothing today, please take that message home, that you as a Black woman, as an Asian American woman, as a woman of color, get your screening done. If you cannot see a person, a clinician who looks like me, it's okay. See a white doctor. They will screen you too, okay? So it is really important. Okay, so now I'm just gonna go through each of the 5 cancers individually, and we'll talk a little bit about when to start screening and what frequency and some of the nuances of that, okay? So we're gonna start with breast cancer. And for breast cancer, I'm talking about the average risk for women. So the average risk for the population is about 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer in their life. That's a lot, right? If you think about that. So in this room, there we have like what, 20 of you, 20, 25 of you? That's a lot that there's going to be a few of you guys who are going to get breast cancer, okay? 1 in 8 women. That's a lot. But if you think about the incidence of that in Black women, Hispanic women, Asian American women, Alaskan Native women, that is closer up to like 10 to 18%, like 10 to 18 per 100,000. So that's actually like 3 to 5 times higher, for just the average. So if you have a family history, for example, a mother or a sister, or somebody who has breast cancer in your family, or if your family member actually carries that genetic defect of the BRCA gene, BRCA gene, that increases your risk even more. So for example, if you have BRCA gene 1, you have a 39 to 44% lifetime risk. That is a significant increase, right? BRCA2 is a little bit less, 11 to 17, versus the general population of about 12 to 13%. So, just think about that. So knowing your family history is really important. And then if you have a family history who has a family person who had breast cancer, it's really important to get that genetic testing done, because if that genetic testing marker is positive, you as a family member should get that tested as well, okay? And we can talk about what to do with all of that stuff. But the main screening tool is a mammogram. That's the basic screening tool. So we usually start around 40 years of age for women. And if you have breast cancer family history, we usually start earlier. So a mammogram is the first one. And then if they find something on a mammogram, they may recommend other screening tests too, like an ultrasound or an MRI. And usually, there's a 2D mammogram and a 3D mammogram. You guys have probably heard that from your doctors. These days, most insurance companies are covering the 3D mammograms. I highly recommend the 3D mammograms, particularly if you're younger, because when you're younger, your breasts are denser, and the 3D mammogram is just much better at detecting any kind of abnormalities or masses in there than the traditional 2D. How often? We screen about every 1 to 2 years, depending on, which, like our panelist was talking about earlier. Different, organizations have kind of recommended different things. I tend to screen my women every year, whereas some other people might screen them every 2 years. And it's really about assessing, like Donya said earlier, it's really about assessing your individual risk and, what that shared decision making between you and your clinician are. But, I tend to screen my women about every year or so. And so, and again, if you have family history, consider screening early. I have some women who I start screening in their 30s, because of that. So what happens exactly at a mammogram? How many of you guys in here have had a mammogram? Okay, so a lot of you know what that's like, but some of you who don't know what that's like, this is what happens, right? So you go to, you make an appointment, you go to a clinic, usually that has a mammogram machine, and basically the whole thing takes about 30 minutes. You check in, they have you go to a little locker, you would change into a gown, and then they have you wipe off your deodorant if you have deodorant on, And then they put you into this machine, one breast at a time, right? And they help you put your breast in there. And yes, the squeeze is uncomfortable, okay? I won't lie. It's uncomfortable, but it does not hurt that much. And in fact, the new machines, the 3Ds, are much better, much quicker, much better, and you will live, I promise. And if you have trouble standing, they will also assist you with that. So the whole thing is really like just the actual taking of the pictures. It's about 10 to 12 minutes or so, but the whole thing is about 30 minutes. So that's what it looks like. So this is what a mammogram actually looks like, right? How many of you guys have seen a picture like this before? Okay, so this is a picture of your breasts, and you know, like the picture on the left, they put two breasts together, so it's kind of like, you know, one end, and basically what you're seeing is that, you know, the fatty tissues are the darker stuff and the gray stuff, and the white stuff are kind of like the more glandular fibrous tissues that are in your breast. The younger you are, the more glandular tissues you have, the whiter your breast would look on mammography. And then the older you get, the more your tissues are going to get replaced with fatty tissue, and then it'll look darker as you get older. So what the radiologist is really looking at when they're looking at these mammograms is anything that looks different, right? Looks out of place, looks weird, does not look like the normal tissues that a normal breast at your age should look like. And when they see that, that's when they either do additional views. So sometimes you might hear people say, we need to take some more pictures, and they bring you back. Or they might do an ultrasound if they see something on there to really look at that area better. And sometimes they'll do an MRI, you know, even to look at that even a little bit closer. Okay. Okay. So we're going to sleep over to cervical cancer screening now. So I hope everybody in here has had cervical cancer screening if you are over the age of 20. Show of hands. Awesome. Okay, very good. And if you haven't, I encourage you to do that, okay? Cervical cancer is, it's more prevalent than you think, right? And usually we start screening at the age of 21 and we go to about age 65 unless something changes. So like a lot of my women, because I'm an internist, so you know, I see a lot of older women as well. And my older women ask me like, why did you guys stop screening me at age 65? And mainly is because the growth of the cervical cancer versus the life expectancy is, you know, like at that point, the risk to the patient is probably more than the benefit to the patient. And that's why we kind of stopped doing that unless something changes, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that we just ignore at your age 65, you're done, we ignore you. If you are 65 and you acquire new partners, you got symptoms, you start bleeding, you start having symptoms, of course we're going to screen, we're going to look at that as well. So these are just general guidelines. And again, talk to your physician about your individual case. And then what do we do exactly? What's that test? So, you know, that test is usually in the past it's called a pap smear. Now we kind of usually use the term cervical cancer screening because we do kind of a two-step test now. We do an HPV screening test. HPV stands for human papillomavirus, and that is the virus that there are certain high-risk types of human papillomavirus that causes cervical cancer. And so if we screen you and you have positive for those high-risk human papillomavirus, then we will go ahead and do what's called a cytology, which means that the pathologist actually looks at the cells that we collect from your cervix and make sure that there are no cells that are looking strange, that are looking more like cancerous, and that's so now most people do a two-step test. Okay. One thing I want to say, and we'll talk a little bit more in the next slide about how those tests can be performed. One thing I just want to call out is that, you know, Black and Latina women have much higher rates than the baseline. And then American Indian and Alaskan women also have much higher risk. So if you belong to those groups, really make sure that you get on top of this screening. It's really important. And I would say that, you know, Black women, they usually, when they get diagnosed, it's at a much later rate to a later time too. So you're more likely to do poorly from it. So it's really important that you get screening and you get screening on time and regularly. Okay. So what happens exactly at a cervical cancer screening exam? So this is just a little drawing of where the cervix lives. If you don't know where the cervix lives, it's at the very beginning of your uterus, you know, where the baby goes, where the baby grows at. And those are the cells that we're looking at, okay? That picture in the middle is a brush that is a real common brush. There's a little variations of it from office to office, but that's the brush that we use to collect the sample from the cervix. So what happens is that when you go to your doctor's office, they have you get undressed and they get you on the exam table and then they put you in a little stirrup in the most awkward position ever. And then they insert a little speculum, you know, these days, a lot of us use plastic speculum and, you know, I tend to be nicer to women and I use the smallest possible, just enough so that I can insert the brush and get a good sample. And I try to be really quick. In my office, I am known as the vaginitis queen. So I am really quick at my PAPs. So I get in there, in and out, and my women are like, "Oh, are we gonna do it?" I'm like, "We're not," and they're like, "Oh, okay." So so it doesn't have to be painful, okay? It doesn't have to be painful. And then on the right is kind of an example of what the cells are looking like when we're looking at under the microscope. Okay. So, and then after that, you know, like, so it's not blood or anything like that. It's just a little tiny brush that we scrape from your cervix and that's it. Okay. There is a home test kit that is available now for some clinics. This is not available everywhere yet, so just ask your doctor if your clinic is using it. It's called HPV testing. So this is, remember I told you that there's two components to the testing. We usually do the HPV portion first, and then if that's abnormal, then we do the cytology portion. So you can do this at home if your clinic offers it. So you can, it's just basically a swab. It comes as a kit that looks kind of like that. This is just an example of one, but there's several available. And so you just swab inside of your vagina. So you insert the Q-tip, long Q-tip into your vagina, you swab it around, and then you go back, you put it in a tube, you send it back, and then they do a test. And if the HPV testing is negative, you're good. If HPV testing is positive, then most likely you're going to need to go into your doctor's office and get an extra test, the test that we just talked about, so that we could take a look at those cells. Okay. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about, you know, some of the factors, and you guys who live it know this, that are contributing to some of this disparity of the statistics that I just shared with you about some of the differences in rates for our women of color and then our white women. So we know that some women, a lot of women, like Black and brown women, tend to get diagnosed later, and they have a higher stage of cancer at presentation. That leads to poor outcome. We also know that there are some differences in the tumor biologies of some of those cancers that we see between the Black women and Alaskan Native and Native Latina women versus white women. And that contributes to the poor outcomes. And then we also know that access, right? I heard a lady in the other room talked about insurance access and poor access. Some people it's because they don't have access. Some people it's because they don't have transportation to get to their doctor to get screened. Some people because they have language barriers, they have cultural literacy issues, lots and lots of different ways that we have poor access, and that is a problem. And that's part of the reason why the home HPV testing or cervical cancer screening test was developed, is to try to overcome some of those barriers. Because if we can mail it to your home and you can just send it to us, that increases the opportunity for you to get screened. And then there are socioeconomic determinants and structural barriers, right? Insurance issues. We know that women, only about 8.2% of the US population is uninsured right now, but predominantly the majority of those people that are represented in that uninsured rate are people of color, okay? And that's why you see such a disparity. And then there's the underrepresentation in clinical trials. I can't emphasize this enough for some of our, you know, researchers in the room. They need to enroll people who look like me and look like you in their trials, because otherwise the data does not represent us, right? So it's really hard to extrapolate a bunch of data that is all white people and say, this applies to Black people or Asian people or, whatever, other type of ethnicity that you are, right? So it's really important. I know that there has been some major things that has happened in our history that causes us to lose trust in the healthcare system. And we have fear, we have stigma that are well-founded, well-justified, and yet we are in a new day and age where we, in order to give us better care by people who look like me, I need you to be, able and willing to also participate in those studies and enroll in those studies, because then the data can reflect us, right, as well. So that's a really important one. And then lastly, the comorbid conditions that our BIPOC patient populations just happen to carry, right? We have a higher risk of diabetes. We have higher risk of high blood pressure. We have higher risk of, morbid obesity. And all of those exacerbate and cause our cancers to have poor outcomes. So, it's really a whole package deal. So when I look at my patients, I try to look at my patients as a whole person and think about all of their problems, not just you are a cancer patient or you are a high blood pressure patient. There's so many other things that plays into all of that increases the risk and the complications. Okay, so now let's turn into colorectal cancer screening, okay? This one is really important because this one, I have had the hardest time convincing my patients of color to do, because there's a barrier to it, right? Colorectal cancer usually starts screening around age 45, and this was just, decreased. We used to start at age 50, and we, in the last few years or so, we have decreased it down to 45. And I think it's a good thing, right? Because the reason for that decrease is that we used to screen at age 45 because that's the most prevalent, where white people have started having colon cancer. But if we looked at the data, Black people actually have colon cancer at a much younger age and at a worse outcome. And so we lowered it for everybody just so that we can get everybody to screen at age 45. There's two tests that you can use to screen. One is the colonoscopy. So I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. That is the test that if you get that test done and it's normal, you're good for 10 years. You don't have to go back, okay? If they find something, that's what I was talking about earlier, about finding things early. So if they use a colonoscopy and they look in there and they find some little tiny polyps that are growing, if they can find that, they can snip it out, biopsy it, take it out, and then you won't have colon cancer, right? If you have colon polyps, in fact, we don't wait 10 years to bring you back. Sometimes we wait 3 years, because it depends on what that biopsy looks like. Sometimes we wait 5 years, sometimes 7 years. But that gives us an opportunity to intervene early so you don't actually develop colon cancer, right? If for whatever reason you do not do a colonoscopy, there is another test called the FIT test, and it's basically looking for blood that you don't see with your naked eyes in the stool. And if we see that, then if you test positive for that, then we send you for the colonoscopy. So it's kind of that two-step screening test. And if you are very diligent about doing the FIT testing, the stool card testing that you do at home, studies have shown that if you do that every year for 5 years or so, it's just as good as the colonoscopy. So it's not an inferior test that you're doing it. You just have to remember to do it every year. You just can't skip, like, I do it this year and then 5 years from now I do another one. That's not good, okay? So you got to do it every year. And what it is basically just a little tube that you get at your doctor's office. Sometimes they even mail it out. And when you go to the bathroom, you just open the thing up, and then you have a little tiny brush, and you brush a little bit of stool in there, and you stick it back in there, put it in an envelope, stick it in the mail, comes back to the lab, you're done, okay? So I give it to my patients. I say, when you get home, bring this, put it right next to your toilet, and the next time you go to the bathroom, do it, okay? Don't wait, don't put it in your drawer, because they're gonna sit there in your drawer for another time until you come see me again, and I'm like, hey, did you do that stool card? And they're, no. And I'm like, okay, here's another one, right? Okay. So again, Black adults have the highest rates and death rates from colon cancer. So if you fall into that category, please go get your colon cancer screening, all right? And the best test is the one that you would do, okay? So colonoscopy is a little bit hard to sell because it requires you to do a prep, right? Okay, so this is what it looks like. And what happens is that, like, okay, I'm going to talk something gross because doctors talk about gross things. We need, in order for us to see the inside of your colon, we need you to take all the poop out, right? Okay, so we need you to drink some stuff that is going to force all that poop out so that the inside of the colon can be clean, so that when somebody takes a little camera, like this guy in the little cartoon here, takes a little flexible camera and goes from your bottom all the way through the colon. So your colon goes from your right side of your belly and goes all the way around and comes back down. So we need you to get that whole thing clean so that we can look, okay? So when they go in there, they can look, and then if there's something, there's sometimes a tiny polyp, like 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter, 1 centimeter polyps. If there's poop in there, guess what? Those little tiny polyps can hide, right? So they're not gonna see it. So that's what this little picture over here on the right side is kind of depicting, is those little tiny polyps and stuff like that. So that's what the colon looks like, and we're going on the inside of it, like driving that little camera through. And so it does require you to drink that stuff. So that means that, you're going to be staying, you need to take that day off, because you're going to be close to the toilet, okay? You and your toilet are going to be best friends for that day. And then it does require you to have somebody to take you to the colonoscopy suite where you're going to get this done, right? Because they're going to put you semi-sleep. They're going to give you some medicine, some pain medicine, so that you don't feel it so much, and a little sedation, so you're going to forget about the experience a little bit. Okay, so you can't drive after that. So they require you to have a driver. Okay, so that's really the challenge that I see as a primary care clinician, is that sometimes people don't have that driver. Sometimes they can't take off work, right? So that's the challenge. And that's why I say, okay, if you're an average risk person, it's okay to do the fit testing. But the moment that fit testing becomes positive, we're doing this, we're doing the colonoscopy, okay? Okay, so I already talked about this. It's kind of like beating a, dead horse, but Black folks, 20% more likely to get colorectal cancer and 40% more likely to die than other groups, okay? Sad statistics for me to see, all right? Why? Because Black folks don't get screened as often as everybody else. And there's a delay in follow-up, right? I tell you, you got an abnormal fit test. I tell you, you got to go get a colonoscopy. And then that colonoscopy gets delayed and delayed and delayed for multiple reasons. And then by the time you come back because you got belly pain or you're bleeding from your butt, you got colon cancer now, right? Okay. So that social determinants of health, the transportation issue, the lack of access, the fear, the distrust that we have in the healthcare system, all of that contributes to that delay in follow-up, that delay in care, and that's why we have these kind of numbers. Okay, so the other thing that I think about our community in America, and I think about, so I'm from the Hmong community, and I was born in Laos. So back in Laos, we ate mostly vegetables, mostly unprocessed foods, and we did a lot of physical labor, right? Come to America, guess what? We eat highly processed food, hardly any vegetables, and we very busy with our hands and our minds, but we don't do a lot of physical activity. And that has transformed us into having very high risk of obesity. Now we're starting to drink alcohol like the American folks do. And we started to smoke. And, now we're inheriting all the American diseases too, right? Okay. Now we have colon cancer as well. Okay. So I think about my own community, and then I think about my community at large, and, like, how much do I beg people to eat your vegetables, eat your high fiber diet, stop drinking, like sodas, and stop drinking alcohol so much, and start exercising and taking care of your diabetes. because all these comorbid conditions contribute. And then insurance coverage variations is a big problem. I worry a lot about the impact of HR1. So, enough said about that. I won't talk too much about political stuff. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about lung cancer. So lung cancer, we usually start screening at age 50 to 80 or so for people who have had long histories of smoking, okay? If you have smoked, this is something that is very specific. And I think one of the physicians at the panel talked about how come not everybody who smokes get lung cancer? The reason why we screen is because we don't know, right? We don't know who's going to get. If I could pinpoint, if you wore a shiny little, beam or something like that showed up on your forehead that says, I'm the one who's going to get lung cancer, then we won't have to screen. We can just pick you out. But we don't have that, right? So if you smoke, that's your risk. That's the risk that I'm going to follow to say, okay, now we have to screen you because you fit these criteria that we see that based on studies show that you are more likely to have lung cancer. So that's why we screen. And this is a low dose CT scan that we screen every year. And some race specifics. Again, Black men have the highest lung cancer death rates in this country. So if you got a Black man in your life who smoked, get them screened. Okay, and get them to quit smoking. It's never too late to quit smoking. Okay, yeah, quitting is the best prevention. Okay, stop smoking. This is what the CT scanner looks like. So you lay down, you go in and you lay down on a little tube, and they, buzz you in, and it's a very quick, scan. And the picture on the right is a picture of the lungs. So if you're looking at it, on your left is the person's right, and on your right is the person's left. And all these white stuff in there, just muscle vasculatures like blood vessels and up into the heart, and the black stuff that has the little white spicules, that's the lung. And then this white thing on the left with the circle on, lung cancer, okay? So that's what we're looking for. Okay. Let's go to skin. Okay, so all you people who have melanin in the room thinking, oh, well, that's not for me, I can stop paying attention. Okay, because I have melanin, I have pigments. That'll protect me from the sun. I don't get skin cancer. Oh, that's a white person's disease. That is not true, okay? That is not true. So pay attention. The vast majority of skin cancers do indeed occur in white people, okay, non-Hispanic white people. But that doesn't mean that we get off scot-free, okay? So the melanoma, for example, 26 in 100,000 people will have skin cancer. But so in Black folks, it's a little bit less, right? And so here's where you're doing better. All right, y'all doing better. Hispanics a little bit less better, but still better. And Asians a little better, okay? But, we also have skin cancer, okay? Squamous cell carcinomas, that a different type of cancer than the melanoma that everybody kind of hears about in the news, okay? That actually is more common than melanoma, and it occurs in Black folks too, and everybody else in between as well. Okay, so this is what it kind of looks like. So some different types of skin cancer. Basal cell carcinoma. This is, if you're going to have a skin cancer, I'd rather you not have a skin cancer at all. But if you're going to have one, this is a better one to have. Okay, this is kind of what it can look like. It can just look like a little tiny pearly bump on the skin. It can look like a wound that didn't heal. Just a little crusting on your skin that just didn't go away, or it could look, in Black folks or darker skinned people, that's what it could look like. Okay? It could look scary. So the thing that I would say is that going through training in America for my medical training, all the skin conditions in all the dermatology textbooks, all white people, okay? Mostly white people. Very few examples in darker skinned people, okay? And this is why skin cancer gets missed, because people aren't used to what a particular lesion might look like on darker skinned people versus what it looked like on white people, because we study on white people. So it's really important to kind of learn and to make sure that your doctors understand and learn how to spot different lesions, how they present on a darker skin versus lighter skin. That might be concerning. Squamous cell cancer is another type of cancer. This one, it looks a little bit scary, so most people kind of get a clue to this early. They look scaly, they're kind of patchy, they crust, sometimes they bleed, and definitely they have a higher risk of spreading than the basal cell carcinoma. So sometimes they happen on the lip, on the face. The face and the nose, are really common places. And in the ears, we forget our ears, like when we put sunscreen on, we just go, and then we forget the ears. Or the top of the head, for those balding men. I have one of those. Call it the helicopter landing pad. Don't forget that. Spray that top, or give them a hat, okay? Melanoma in dark skin and light skin, okay? So if you look at, this is a really common place for people who have dark skin. This is why I say, if you have darker skin, you're not free from this. Look for other places that you're not exposed to the sun. That actually is a place that's really much more common for melanoma for people who have darker skin. So like the nail beds, for example, or places where the sun don't shine, and so it can look really kind of like, oh, it's nothing, or maybe it's just a bruise. But if it's not going away, get that looked at, okay? So here's how you can tell, right? So the top line is normal, okay? Early detection, so these are the things that you should learn. A, B, C, D, okay? If you know the alphabet, you know how to spot skin cancer, or at least things that you should get looked at. Normal, everything should look very symmetric, round things. We all have like these things that, come on our skin. Looking very round. The borders look very even, very normal looking, very even. You can draw a circle around it. The color is very uniform. There's only one color. And then the diameter is usually less than 1/4 of an inch, okay? And versus a melanoma, a skin cancer, you look at the thing and it's smudgy. You can't actually define the borders of it, right? It looks kind of like just kind of ill-defined. The borders are very uneven, and there might be multiple colors in them. There might be some red, some brown, some, darker stuff. And then it's big, usually bigger than 1/4 of an inch. So those are kind of the easy ways that you can spot, okay? Okay, so why? We talked a lot about this already, but BIPOC patients, Black, Indigenous, people of color, we're less likely to have melanoma than white folks, but we are more likely to be diagnosed at a later stage because people don't recognize it. So we have worse outcomes when we do have it, okay? So really important to get your skin checked and wear sunscreen. Don't go, oh, I'm good, like my husband and I go to the Sun Belt or go to Hawaii or wherever. And he's like, oh, you're not gonna wear sunscreen, you're fine. I'm like, he's white, okay. So he turns very, very pink. And I'm like, I may tan beautifully, but I too am at risk for skin cancer, honey. So I am gonna wear sunscreen as well. And certainly the mortality is very high for us BIPOC patients. So really consider doing yourself a favor by wearing sunscreen and checking yourself, okay? So overall, we know that we have increased melanin, darker skin, right? We provide some variations in exposure to UV lights and stuff, and that can protect some in some melanoma, but we're not protected from all skin cancer, so don't rest too easy, okay? And BIPOC, remember that those areas that aren't exposed to the sun are those areas that we should be looking at if you got darker skin. And I have to say, dermatologists, they make themselves scarce for a reason, right? I mean, like, there's not a lot of dermatologists around, and then the dermatologists who are around, harder for people who already have challenges to accessing healthcare to get into, right? Average time to get into a dermatologist now is about 6 to 9 months, unless you got proven skin cancer, then they can get you in within a week. But, so make sure that you have, even your primary care doctors, they should really be looking at your skins when you go. So don't be so shy and don't take off take off your clothes and let them look at you, okay? It's okay. We don't care what you look like. We ain't judging, okay? Um, okay, let's look at liver cancer. This one is really close to my heart, okay? Because my father had liver cancer. And how we screen for this is through a special abdominal ultrasound called FibroScan, and then a blood test called alpha fetoprotein. And so it's super easy, but many, many people do not do it. So there was a recent study, I don't think published yet, at Mayo, that of all the people who got diagnosed with liver cancer, only 14% of them were screened. Okay, that's so sad to me because we have the technology, easy technology, right? All right, here's just a it's a blood test, simple blood test that you go to the office to get drawn. And it's a simple ultrasound, not invasive. We're not even sticking anything in you, okay? Just an ultrasound. So who should be screened? People who have cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is basically like a liver that has been damaged, that is scarred, and it's failing, okay, of any cause. So alcohol, Dr. Balbo is in the audience. Alcohol, if you drink alcohol to excess, you can damage your liver, right? Eventually your liver will scar, your liver will develop fibrosis, your liver will develop cirrhosis, your liver will fail, and then comes a slew of other things that will come with that, and you will die. But if you don't die first of those other complications, you may develop liver cancer. Very high risk for that, right? Chronic hepatitis B. This one is really important to me because my Hmong community and the Somali community have the highest hepatitis B incidence in Minnesota and in the US, mainly because where we come from, right? Laos, Southeast Asia, Africa, we have the highest incidence of chronic hepatitis B infections. And hepatitis B infection, the thing about it is that if you develop liver cancer from chronic hepatitis B, it is the most responsive to immunotherapy, which is the treatment of choice for liver cancer. So for those of you who have influence, please tell your families, tell your friends, go get screening for hepatitis B. If you have chronic hepatitis B, get this screening, blood test and ultrasound every 6 months. That is the standard of care. That is the best way for us to know that we should intervene early, okay? And then there's other types of infections like hepatitis C also, can cause liver cancer. Then there's a bunch of other ones that I won't cover exactly today. But here you go. 4% prevalence of chronic hepatitis B in the Asian population. That's like aggregated Asian population, but 18% in the Hmong population, okay? And some studies actually found that younger adults from 15 to 29-year-olds, even higher prevalence compared to the general population. That's 0.3 to 0.7%, not even 1% in the general population versus 18%. Okay, that's extremely high. Somali, 15 to 21% prevalence in Minnesota. So these two communities have the highest disparities, and they are, most at risk. So, and vaccination, there is a vaccine that prevents this. This is why we vaccinate those babies the moment that they come out of moms. So it's really important, completely preventable. I see so many vertical transmissions, meaning that the moms give birth to the babies and then the babies get it, right? If we don't vaccinate, that's why we vaccinate those babies, and that's why we screen those moms. That's why prenatal care is so important. And that's why, that's why we keep hounding you. My job as a pediatrician, my most important job as a pediatrician is to vaccinate your children. And I know there's a lot of misinformation out there with the current political climate thing, but that science hasn't changed. Vaccination saves lives. Okay, so I talked about all the good things about screening. What are some of the downsides of screening? Okay, so potentially there could be some false alarms, false positives, right? Some people go get their mammogram, they see something, they recommend a biopsy, now you're freaked out, right? You're scared, you're freaked out, you don't know what's gonna happen. And then you go get a biopsy, it's painful because now it's invasive, somebody's sticking a needle in your breast, okay? And it turns out it's benign, right? Now you're like, oh, well, do I believe you? Do I believe the screening test, So there is a certain amount of false positive, but sometimes we can't see everything on imaging. Like we can see that it looks weird or it looks abnormal. But sometimes in order for us to really know whether that's cancer or not, we do need to look at it under the microscope. And the only way to do that right now, maybe someday they'll invent the Scotty. I don't know how many of you are Trekkie geeks in the audience like me, but they'll invent the tricorder and they'll just go and go, oh yeah, that's cancer. Or no, that's not cancer. But until then, we still need a biopsy. And then finding those slow cancers that doesn't really cause harm, sometimes that can just kind of cause some emotional, distress. And then radiation from the CT scans from like the lung cancer, small amount, but I know some people get concerned about that. So, but still. So how do you decide what's right for you? Talk to your clinician and know what when you should be screening, and then consider your family history, when you should be screening, how often, when you should use the usual screening schedule versus deviate from that, and weigh those benefits and risks. And then once you start screening, stay on schedule, okay? Don't go, oh yeah, I already did that once, I don't need to do it again. No, you got to do it again, okay? That's why we call it screening. So key takeaways from today: start at the right age. If you're Black, Latina, or other higher risk groups, get your screening done, and screening saves lives and prevention counts. So quit your smoking, eat better, exercise, get your HPV vaccines. Okay, that's all I got. Questions?
Yeah, we'll have questions in just a moment.
Okay.
All right. So before we go into questions, I'm here just to really share with you the importance of being screened. I'm a breast cancer survivor and I have been screened. I mean, I was screened regularly. It was during COVID. I was diagnosed during COVID. So I just really want to share with you the importance of screenings for breast cancer. They found a lump. I went back for a biopsy and it was breast cancer. So even if you fear that it might be cancer, like cancer is not the end all. So it is so important to be screened. So important. Talk to someone. There's people out there that can be there to support you no matter what it is, no matter what your diagnosis is. It's extremely important to be screened, men and women. So thank you, Dr. Yeng, for being here, and we learned a lot from this session. So we are going to open it up to questions now. If there are questions in the audience, please raise your hand. And we have a mic. We've got one here, and then two here, and three there. Share the space. Yes. Somebody's going to bring you a mic. Just be one moment.
I have a question regarding pap smears.
Mhm.
What if a person has had a hysterectomy?
Mhm.
Should they still have pap smears?
That's a great question. The question is, if a person has had a hysterectomy, should they still have a pap smear? And the question, the answer is depends, right? It depends whether they took your cervix or not when you had your hysterectomy. So back in like way before, okay, probably like more than 10 years ago, there were surgeons who, like, for whatever reason, let's say you got a hysterectomy for bleeding excessively, and it was not cancerous situation or whatever, they just took the uterus and they did not take your cervix, so they lopped off that picture, they lopped off right at the cervix or right above that cervix. Then that means if you still have a cervix, yes, you still need cervical cancer screening. But if they did it where they took the whole thing and now you just have a blind vaginal pouch that they sewed in, but your cervix is gone, then you do not need a cervical cancer screening anymore.
Are there any screenings available for uterine and ovarian cancer? Because they seem to have high mortality rates.
Yeah. So the answer is depends. We don't have recommended guidelines for uterine cancer screening or ovarian cancer screening because they are incredibly difficult, right? And we just don't have good enough data to actually come out and say everybody who has ovaries should be screened, everybody who has a uterus should be screened. So for those ones, we usually use, like when we screen for cervical cancer, we take the brushings, but we also do what's called a bimanual exam. So what we're doing there is we're feeling your uterus and your ovaries, right? And so I'm sticking my hand in there and I'm feeling your uterus and your ovaries to see if I feel any lumps or bumps, or, does your uterus feel normal? Like, is it the normal size? Is it feeling normal to me? If I should not be able to feel your ovaries too much, right? When I sweep that ovary over my hand, I should not be able to feel them. And if I'm feeling them, then maybe there's something wrong. So those are kind of like our screenings that we do now. So we would then follow that up with maybe an ultrasound of your pelvic exam and stuff.
We have one more question back here.
Thank you, Dr. Yang. This is really good. I wish I can take you around and have you present to different women. Um, I'm from the Somali community, and we talk a lot about liver cancer. It's accepted. People know about hepatitis B and the risks. When it comes to breast cancer, there's a lot of secrets around it. And in just the last, I would say 2 years, I'm a women's health nurse practitioner. So I've had Somali women come to us with breast cancer, but they don't speak to each other. And it's almost like they're hiding it. And I feel so bad because in the general community in the US, we are very accepting of breast cancer. But these sisters of mine are struggling by themselves, and I can't even connect them. So I have to go talk to one, gather information from her, and go back to the other one. I don't know how it looks like in the Hmong community, but are there things that we could do to create more, I would say, sisterhood, not just the providers, but as a community too?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think that we experience it in various levels at different communities, right? Like our African American community, for example, they experience that too, right? And so there was a lot of shame, a lot of like distrust. I don't want to talk about it. Same thing in the Hmong community. I see it a lot in my Somali patients as well. And so what I've done, or what we've done in my organization, is we have created some videos that are testimonials that are by different community, women from different communities, so African American community, Hmong community, Somali, and we really talk about telling the story, sharing your personal story, and just like Donya did. About what they went through and how it impacted them and why it's important for them to speak out and share that story with everyone else. Because I think that historically, particularly like the Somali community and the Hmong community, women's bodies are, it's rooted in our culture, rooted in our history of very paternalistic culture, and we don't share our bodies, right? We don't reveal our bodies to the world. We don't share that. It's a sacred kind of part of our bodies, and so. I think that that's part of the stigma, that we don't share, we don't talk about it because it's so private. And I, as a woman clinician, um, even I'm from the Hmong community, and I have a very hard time sometimes convincing my women to let me do their breast exam, let me do their pelvic exams, and I have to talk about it again and again and again. And part of what I do is really meeting them where they're at. So sometimes it's just having conversations. I won't touch them, you know? And sometimes it's just like, okay, asking again and again. So it doesn't mean that you write in the chart patient decline, breast exam, patient decline, pelvic exam, never revisit that again. The next time that they're in, I'm going to have the conversation again, So part of it is just having the conversation again, and part of it is sharing our stories. And I think that the more that we can encourage healthcare workers who look like me and you, the more that we can, in trust or develop that trust with our community and allow people to open up to us at their own time.
Thank you. So I have two questions. So the first one is, how is the use of ChatGPT and other AI tools affecting our community's healthcare behavior? This is particularly in terms of consulting AI for health advice and cancer prevention instead of visiting a doctor, and also maybe prior to consulting to Chat GPT, we got a home testing kit. Um, Thank you. And I have another question.
Yeah, so that's a really important question, and so don't get me wrong that I don't love the technology of AI, right? I think it's a fantastic development. It's a wonderful tool, but it is that. It's a tool. It's not a replacement for physicians. It's not a replacement for healthcare clinicians' advice. And so the tools is only as good as the information that it was trained on. And the problem is that a lot of these AI tools or AI agents out there in the web are trained on misinformation as well as good information, right? So there are some really good, AI tools that are out there that I myself use to help augment my ability to care for my patients. But for the masses, I think that they have to be really careful about using things like ChatGPT for things like sometimes most of the time the cervical cancer screening and other kind of screening is relatively good. I would say that I've looked at that information is relatively accurate for the most part, as long as you know how to ask the question, right? If you ask the question, what are peer reviewed, guided guidelines to cervical cancer screening, it will go and look at like the peer review materials, the guidelines that are published that are actually good science, right? But if you don't ask that question that way and you say, what are the cervical cancer guideline? What should I do to screen? Well, it might just give you the stuff that it sees on the web, and it may not be correct. So just be really careful about that. And like other things that we've seen some really catastrophic things like mental health, for example, like that has led to some deaths because the chat bot says, sure, go ahead, kill yourself. That sounds really great. So just be really careful about that.
Thank you so much, doctor. And I really wish that my family was here because I have some relatives that they are using Chat GPT and asking like if they have symptoms. Like I have a headache, what should I take? And I'm like, just go to the doctor. But thank you. And my second question is, why is it that Latina and Asian women are diagnosed at later stages? Is this because of genetics?
We don't really know the answer to that question yet. I mean, we think that mostly right now, we think the data that I see is that it has a lot to do with the social determinants of health. So access issues, the kind of the structural barriers that we face. There has not been good studies, at least that I know of, that points to the fact that there are some genetic defects that are different in Latinas and Asian women versus like I think our African American. We do see that there are some when they do develop, once they develop breast cancer, for example, that they have some genetic specifics findings in them that causes them to have worse outcomes than white women, for example. You have an answer, or help me with an answer.
Thank you, Amna. Just a comment, because I think it's important, as we have sort of talked about this throughout the day, about the fact that it's really hard for people to get information on who they are, their own situations, right? Because we are giving information that is more on the average, or maybe is informed by studies that are all on one community or one type of population. ChatGPT and AI will feed off of that, right? And so I think that a message for the relatives and the people that are referring to that is you need to make sure that the person that is giving you information takes into account all your risk factors. You may be having, a certain diet or you're maybe taking some medications. ChatGPT will not be able to mine all of these things and consider what is good for you as the individual person, taking into account all of these details, because when you're typing in, you're not making the list of things that you're instead providing your doctor when you go in and the nurse goes through your information, right? So I think that that is really where, yes, you can get generic, general information, but it's never going to be good for your own individual situation. And that's where it's important to go beyond that and then translate into a human being and the doctor. Sorry, just wanted to.
Yes, yes. Second that.
So we just have one question and then she'll be the last question that we're able to take today.
Where's the question?
Right here.
I was just gonna say that, this is just a comment, and thank you so much. Because now what concerns me in my community is that because of the health insurance, so now they are relying more on the AI tools, and they are going to the pharmacy to get medicine over the counter. So that is very concerning for me. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a very big challenge. And I would just say that there are community clinics, you know, like if they don't have good insurance coverage, that they can't go to their regular previous clinicians where they used to have coverage. There are clinics available in our community. We're lucky in Minnesota to have like a lot of community clinics that either do free care or do like sliding scale care, so that you know you can get access. And there are actually many other organizations, like for example, Minnesota Gastroenterology does free colonoscopies for people who don't have insurance and who don't have who meet certain financial thresholds and stuff. So there are services and resources that we can help people find.
And I will add, I mean, this is why we do the work that we do at the Cancer Center, is to make sure that these resources and these screenings are accessible for folks who are uninsured, underinsured. So that's why a day like this exists. But I will just plug one thing because Dr. Yang touched on this. We do have a community clinic guide that's outside at the screening check-in table that you can pick up. It's a list that we compiled from some of the local community clinics, federally qualified health centers that will take people on a sliding scale fee if they are uninsured or underinsured. So please pick up those guides at the screening check-in table. And I will pass it over to one more question. I cannot say no to Benita.
I work at the Minnesota Department of Health, the SAGE program. So women who are uninsured or underinsured can get breast exams, pap smears, and mammograms. And so my information is on the BCEA table. So you can call the 800 number. You can be 250% of the federal poverty level. We don't ask for any verification of income. And so you can call us and we can get you screened, breast, cervical cancer screening, sometimes diagnostic screening as well.
Thank you for sharing that.
All right,
All right.
so thank you, Dr. Yang, and thank you everyone in the audience for your thoughtful questions and your engagement. We now have a 30-minute wellness break, so we are asking that you please make sure that you visit the exhibitors in the cafe. Also, complete the screening if you haven't already done that today, and connect with each other.